This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have licensed psychotherapist and amazing author, Dennis Palumbo, here to talk about his newest Dennis Rinaldi thriller, Panic Attack. Welcome, Dennis.
Oh, thank you, Marie. It's very, very nice to be here.
I am so excited. I have been following you from afar for a while, reading a lot of your nonfiction and just seeing what you're up to all the time on social media. And this is so very special for me to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before I start gushing about how great this novel is, can you start listeners off with an overview of what the story is about?
Yeah, Panic Attack is the sixth novel in my Daniel Rinaldi series. Daniel Rinaldi is a psychologist and a trauma expert who consults with the Pittsburgh police. He specializes in dealing with the victims of violent crime, dealing with the PTSD symptoms that often accompany the aftermath of an event like that. And Daniel knows about this. The backstory is he and his wife are coming out of a restaurant, they get mugged. The wife dies at the scene. Daniel Rinaldi is shot but survives. And so he is crippled with survivor guilt. And as a result, his mission is to help other survivors. Panic Attack is about a series of sniper attacks that are happening in the city of Pittsburgh where the books are set. It appears initially that the victims are chosen at random. The police, with Daniel's help, catch the sniper about 2/3 of the way through the book, but that's not the end of the mystery. In fact, that's the beginning of the mystery. It deals with what a colleague of mine calls the age of trauma, and that's the age we're in right now. Tremendous uncertainty about the world, fear of violence, a rise in depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. I deal with a lot of the symptoms that we associate with that level of anxiety. Having someone on a rooftop shooting at you is a sort of metaphor for what life feels like for a lot of people. They wake up in the morning, they don't know what they're going to see on CNN in 2 hours. What I'm also excited about is that the audiobook of Panic Attack is coming out April 7th. It will be out by the time this airs. The reader is really good, and I'm very pleased now that all six of the Daniel Rinaldi books are in audiobook form. They're also in hardcover, paperback, ebook. I think the only platform that it doesn't have is the one where I come over to your house and read it to you aloud. But if the price is right, maybe we could work something out.
I'm
Thank
also
you.
going to be looking for ways to find what that right price is to get you to come over and read the books.
I'm surprisingly reasonable.
Okay. There was a line early on in the story. It wasn't the biggest, longest sentence in the world, but it really resonated with me. And it was, in essence, the city itself was having a panic attack. I remember as I grew up asking the older generations, what was it like for a whole generation to experience group panic and anxiety?
Yeah.
And then we had 9/11 and we've had COVID and we've had all of these things. And that line was just so powerful, especially in this context where this sniper is harassing an entire city. He's terrorizing them.
That's right. And I think it's a mirror to how people feel harassed by the events of life right now. There was a shooting some years ago at a nightclub in Woodland Hills outside of Los Angeles here. I had an image in my head of one of the people who was going to that nightclub a couple hours before, standing in front of the mirror, trying to decide which shirt looked the best, having no idea that in 3 hours his life was going to be snuffed out for no reason at all. But at that moment, the most important thing was, how does this look? Do I look okay? And I thought that's the tragedy and the heartbreak of the human condition. It all hangs on a thread. And right now, that thread has never felt so slender. And I think one of the reasons people respond to the Daniel Rinaldi books is he's trying to help toughen that thread up for people. He believes it's his mission to stand between chaos and trauma.
And it's so beautiful the way that he interacts with people, because you're 6 novels in, there are recurring characters here. And some of these characters over the series arc have been hurt because of association with him. It's painful to watch what he has to go through, because he's looking at people and he's seeing ways that they've been broken, and he knows he's the reason for it.
That's right. Some friends of his get involved because of a person who is after Daniel and tries to hurt him by hurting the people close to him. It's devastating for the reader and mostly devastating for Daniel, because some of the effects are going to be quite lasting for those people. And his sense of guilt is so easily activated to begin with. I really think that it makes him such a human character, even though he's very proactive and he's not only insightful, but I got to tell you, he takes risks that I would never take in a million years. In fact, his friend Angela at one point says, I think you take those risks because you have a death wish. Some part of you thinks you're going to keep pursuing these things until somebody finally takes you out and you can join your wife, Barbara, for whom you still feel guilty after all these years. So it's fascinating to watch his evolution. The thing that I'm so struck by, I worked so hard to make the books have a lot of twists and turns. But what I mostly hear from my readers is, because the books are in the first person, you get to be in the mind and heart of the therapist. And so many people have written me to say, I never really knew this is what was going on in the mind and heart of a therapist. I've even had people say to me, thanks to the book, I'm willing to try therapy now. I want to meet someone like Daniel who's going to try to take care of me, or at least pay attention to who I am.
Daniel is a beautifully flawed person. No matter what he's been through, it never stops that passion he has to heal and to save.
Yep,
And
that's
he
right.
does it in such an empathetic, natural way. And I
Well,
think that's why folks probably love him so much.
well, he to me is the idealized version of me. He's me without all my stuff. He has his stuff, but his stuff's more romantic and exciting than my stuff.
Well, and that was one of the things you touched on as well, that delineation, it's not just guilt, it's shame. And I was doing a little research as I was reading the book into the differences between shame and guilt.
The way I tend to break it down is, guilt is your feelings about something you did, as opposed to shame, which is your feelings about who you are intrinsically. David Steinberg had one of the best jokes I've ever heard about that. He was Jewish and he married a Catholic woman. And he said it was a great marriage. I taught her guilt and she taught me shame. And funny as that is, it's also unerringly true.
And it's interesting when you think about that, because with guilt, you could push that one thing and say that's isolated. But shame, if it's truly who we are, that's a lot deeper and bigger to try to fix.
Yeah, shame is the first line of the very first novel, Miriam. It's the very first line is, shame is a deep well.
Creating these amazing characters is not new to you. You have a history of creating really engaging, fantastic characters, whether it's on screen or on the page.
I was very, very lucky. I came to Hollywood to be a film and TV writer in my early 20s. After a lot of struggle and a lot of spec scripts that didn't go anywhere, I had this weird week where the week I sold my first mystery short story to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine was the same week I was hired as a writer on Welcome Back, Kotter. So both my prose life and my TV writing life happened the same week. Something like that usually doesn't happen. But that's how I began. I began writing sitcoms with my partner, Mark Evanier, who luckily was a lot smarter and funnier than I was. But it was a joy to work on sitcoms. The first one, like I said, was Welcome Back, Kotter, which turned out to be a big, big hit. And so I did a lot of television. When I was growing up, my dad's favorite movie star was Errol Flynn. In those days, in the early 50s, they used to show the Late Late Show on television. And if there was an Errol Flynn film, like The Adventures of Robin Hood or Captain Blood, and they'd come on like at 1 in the morning, my dad would sneak me out of bed. And so my mom didn't hear. We'd both watch the television with our noses pressed up against the screen with the volume really, really low. And he introduced me to Errol Flynn. And I thought to myself, when I was a Hollywood writer, what it would be like if I could bring Errol Flynn to our house. And that's where the germ of My Favorite Year came from. And that was an amazing experience. It was the first screenplay I'd ever written that sold. I'd written a number of spec screenplays that did not sell, but people thought the writing was good. And somebody at Fox finally said, "Do you have any ideas?" And I said, "Well, what about Errol Flynn? What if he was a guest on like your Show of Shows, which was the old Sid Caesar show?" And I wrote it for Peter O'Toole. And what was fascinating is that nobody wanted Peter O'Toole. This was years after Lawrence of Arabia and a couple of films he had made, one with Audrey Hepburn. I forget what the other one was. So the movie didn't get made. It languished for 4 years at Fox. And then Peter O'Toole got nominated as Best Actor for a film called The Stuntman. And he was bankable for about 3 months. And during those 3 months, MGM bought the film and it got made with Peter O'Toole. Fox wanted initially Michael Caine, and then they went after Albert Finney. And Albert Finney said, "No, you don't want me, you want Peter O'Toole." And one of the proudest moments of my life was years after the movie came out, toward the end of his life, Peter O'Toole was on a talk show and he was talking about his films. And he said, "The only movie I'd ever want to do a sequel to was My Favorite Year." So that meant a lot to me.
Oh my goodness.
But wonderful actor. I love Peter O'Toole. There's a great story about O'Toole and Richard Harris, both of them famous drinkers. And I forget what play they were in, but across the way from the theater was a bar, which is where they were every night. And then the stage manager would have to come and tell them, "Hey, it's your cue." One night, the stage manager came in, got Richard Harris, and said, "Hey, come on, it's your cue." Harris goes out on stage, he trips, he falls all the way down stage, right in front of the front row. And a woman in the front row screams when she sees him and yells, "My God, the man's drunk." And Richard Harris gets up on one elbow and says, "Wait till you see O'Toole."
Very good, very good. Oh my goodness. I cannot imagine the types of things that you have seen over the course of your career.
Well, I was very lucky. I had a really nice run in show business, about 20 years. And since then, I've been very, very lucky as a therapist in private practice for almost over 30 years now. That journey itself, from being a Hollywood writer to becoming a psychotherapist, was itself a strange kind of road to Damascus experience. I've been very, very lucky. And I work primarily with creative people in my practice, writers, actors, directors, whatever. I can identify with where they come from. And it's now led me not only to the stories that I write, but to this column that I write now for Psychiatric Times called Creative Minds, in which I talk about what it's like being a therapist to creative patients. Not only the successful ones, but the ones who are still trying to be creative. The lawyer who wants to write stories, the doctor who wants to write poetry. And the thing that has been so fascinating for me is that the ones in my practice who are really successful, seasoned veterans, struggle creatively in exactly the same way as the wannabes do. The key for everyone to understand is that every successful artist used to be a struggling artist, and all the successful artists still struggle.
Well, that was one of the things I've always wondered about you because most of us grow up, let's just say folks of us of a certain era grew up being told, you can be a left brain or a right brain person. And if you're a creative, this is kind of the way you think of the world, you perceive the world, these are the things you do. And if you're not, if you're more attracted to math or the sciences, this is kind of who you are and what you are. But I'm glad to see that over time we're adapting. And I think you're the quintessential example, Dennis, that we can be, because here you are writing very scientific journals about human psychology. And then on the other side of the coin, creating beautiful art.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. For some reason, since I think good clinical work is as much an art as it is a science and requires a level of intuition as well as clinical acumen, I think I'm able to work with aspects of the psychological theories that people expound because I really do believe the theories say as much about the theorist as they do about man. As the joke always goes, you don't read Freud to learn about man, you read Freud to learn about Freud. And I think that that's true. Doesn't invalidate their insights, but it's important to remember that all of our ideas come from within us. Everything we see is subjectively derived, including what aspects of science appeal to us. You may say, well, I have an intellectual interest in this area of psychological treatment. But if you talk to that person for 5 minutes, you realize, of course, this would be the theoretical orientation they would choose. Of course, this would be the theoretical orientation that feels like home to them. It matches their mythology of the world. As the psychologist Alice Miller said, our childhood is the air we breathe. And I think how we're formed in our childhood, the dynamics of the relationships in our family of origin, what they do is they create a kind of mythology about how the world works. So you grew up thinking people can't be trusted, or all good works are rewarded, or no good work gets rewarded. And we need theories because how arbitrary life is terrifying. It's so arbitrary that we need to make models. We need to have concepts that make it make sense.
It's interesting looking at your career because the there is a through line, I think, with it, and that's whether you're going into psychology or opening a book, we're always trying to explore who we are and what we are. And maybe sometimes when we open books, it's our own personal private way of saying, yes, there's this family of origin and there's all of these beliefs that I had. But what if? What if things are different? How are other people experiencing it? And giving us Daniel and letting us see inside his head is probably very therapeutic for a lot of folks to get to explore that and see, hey, there are other people who do have this level of training and they're still struggling too.
That's right. I think one of the things that make art so important and so powerful is its relatability, its universality. And the thing that's so striking about art, particularly writing, is that no matter how personal or idiosyncratic the work is, it tends to generalize out to everybody else. You don't have to have ever wanted to be a boxer in your life, but everyone knew what Rocky Balboa was trying to accomplish in Rocky, to prove something about himself. So you can write the most specific thing that feels as though it is only applicable to you. And I guarantee you, no matter what the contours of it like, or even the context is, thematically, it will generalize out. Let's face it, when Caesar says et tu, Brute, he's essentially saying, you mean even you, my best friend, are behind me getting croaked right now? Travels 2,000 years quite easily.
That's exactly where I was going to go, Dennis. It's about to come out of my mouth. Shakespeare, lots of young people and still some adults struggle with the antiquated, what they consider the antiquated language, and that it creates a barrier for them. But if you understand it, you realize whether they were dressed, in hose and garters or they're dressed in jeans today, we're all going through the same things. If you want the handsome guy over in the corner, or oh gosh, your kid, you don't know if they're on the right path, whatever it is, these same themes come up for every human who's ever walked this earth.
That's right. I mean, in Othello, who doesn't know from jealousy? In Hamlet, who doesn't know from, gee, my dad's dead and my mom couldn't wait 2 seconds to marry this other guy? I mean, that happens in my practice every other day. So no, I'm a big fan of Shakespeare, and there's so many gems in there. I mean, to be or not to be, to thine own self be true.
One of my favorites is, and I'm probably going to mangle this quote, but I think it's there are more things in heaven and earth than are thought of in your philosophy, Horatio, something along
That's
those
it.
lines,
That's pretty much it. And boy, has that turned out to be true.
and continues to evolve.
And we didn't know that space and time could bend until Einstein showed us that it could.
Going from that, maybe it's not all about you, to sometimes it is about you. Could you tell us a little bit about the new Hulu series?
The patient, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, this was an interesting experience. I wrote about this a couple years ago. Again, it was kind of unusual because I've been retired from film and TV for about 30 years, and then out of the blue, a couple years ago, I got a phone call from Joel Fields and Joe Weisberg, who were the creators of The Americans, and they called me and said, "Look, you're a pretty well-known therapist here in Los Angeles, and we know you have a background writing film and television. We're doing a new show called The Patient, and we'd like you to be the consulting producer on it. We want to make sure our therapist sounds like a therapist." So I went, okay, what's it about? It's about a serial killer who kidnaps and holds hostage a therapist in hopes that the therapist will cure his homicidal rages. He chains the therapist to a bed, and he goes out occasionally and kills people. And during the course of the 12 episodes, we see the therapist run the gamut from being terrified and angry to slowly begin realizing there's nothing he can do about his situation. So he begins trying to treat the patient, actually trying to help this guy, and he's trying to escape. But it's also a fascinating clinical case. I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen the show yet, but it doesn't end that well for our hero. And after the 12 episodes were written, they cast the show, and they cast a wonderful actor, Steve Carell. And I don't know whether it was from osmosis or what. I don't know what the hell happened. But after the three of us had worked together for so long, for some reason, they made Steve Carell up with a salt and pepper beard and glasses. And there he is, looking like me, talking like me. And I thought, isn't that funny? I didn't even give it a thought. Here I was 30 years as a clinician, and I was so clueless until a number of my patients saw the show and were traumatized by this picture, the image of someone who looked and sounded like me being held hostage, chained to a bed, and ultimately coming to a bad end. It was incredibly traumatizing for them. It elicited rage on their part, like, why didn't you try to escape? Why would you treat this guy? You better never let anything like this happen to you. Why didn't you tell us that this show was going to have a person who looked like you? Even though it caused me enormous amount of angst and guilt. Talk about guilt. I felt really guilty. The silver lining was it turned out to be the origin of a lot of great work with a number of these patients. We got to look at their vulnerability and dependence on me. We got to deepen the discussion of their transference on me and what they had a right to expect from me, and my countertransference on them, what I owed them, and how the intimacy of the relationship is fraught with danger and disappointment and the possibility of hurting or alarming the other person, which is what happens in all relationships that are intimate. So the only silver lining is we did a lot of good work with a few of these patients who were quite traumatized. I came away with just one wish, which is the next time I ever consult on a show, I just hope the lead character doesn't look like me. So, but it
You'll have to
was
write that into the contracts.
yeah, I better write it right into the contract. He has to look like someone else. So
No
anyway, that's
similar diction patterns, none of that.
yes. So
Wow.
that was a fairly bizarre experience for me.
Wow. Wow. Like I said, you've had your hands and fingers into so many different things, but all kind of with that through line of exploration of humanity and helping us to see ourselves better.
Yeah, that's my goal is to write as authentically as I can. I think that's the best we can do as humans is to try to become as authentic as we can in the context of being social beings and the balance between the two.
A tightrope indeed sometimes.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed.
Well, again, this was a fantastic read. I absolutely was blindsided in the end. Absolutely loved it. In fact, there's an extra little reveal too. So readers are going to literally get every page is going to be worth it all the way to the very, very, very last.
Well,
So
I'm so glad you liked it.
now, for all your existing fans and for those who will just be finding you now, Dennis, where is the best place for folks to turn? Is it your website or your
Well,
social media?
I kind of ended my website. It's just as easy to Google me. If you Google me, you'll find all my articles and short stories and stuff. And I'm on Facebook. I'm one of the, last holdouts, I guess. I also wrote a book that has all of my columns from when I wrote for the Writers Guild magazine. The book is called Writing from the Inside Out, and it's about how to survive the life of a writer. There's not a word of advice on how to write, but how to survive procrastination, writer's block, anxiety, depression, envy, loneliness, all the things that are accompanying the writer's life. And it's a pretty good book. It's been around for many, many years. It's taught in universities all over the world. I just learned they're teaching it at a writing class in Oxford, which made me very happy. So.
Absolutely wonderful. I feel like I need to go live that book because I'm plagued by all of those things myself. So I'm so glad to hear that it's out there, and I will go look for it as soon as we finish up here.
Oh, good. I really appreciated you having me on, and I hope it's been entertaining and interesting.
It absolutely has. And what's also been highly entertaining is the very wonderful panic attack.
Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you, Dennis. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.